Welcome to the MOOC of Decision Maker in Vaccinology. We are going to start with the history of vaccines. The history of the world is intertwined with the impact that infectious disease have had on the populations. Epidemics of infectious disease have been documented throughout the history. For instance, ancient Egypt and Greece describe epidemics of smallpox, tuberculosis, and diphtheria. The morbidity and mortality of infectious disease profoundly shaped politics, commerce, and culture. In the spread of this infectious disease, no one was spared. For example, Ramses V, the fourth pharaoh of the 20th dynasty of Egypt, may have died because of smallpox. The plague of Athens was an epidemic that affected the ancient Greece in 430 before Christ. Many different pathogens have been suggested as the cause of this epidemic, from smallpox, bubonic plague to typhus. There have been many epidemics in the history, like Spanish flu, diphtheria, polio, cholera, and to highlight some of the major outbreaks, there has been smallpox epidemics worldwide from the 11th to the 20th century, and the bubonic plague from Roman Empire in 6th century until mid-90s, which was also spread all over the world via trade route. So, what did mankind do to get protected against these outbreaks? Imagine a world where none of the plagues and the viruses that emerged were cured. Had no treatment been available, probably this world would have perished centuries ago. However, it didn't, which raises a question of how we got to this point that we as humans were able to fight with the unavoidable disease over the years. Although wrong theories or knowledge have hindered advances in understanding, there are also examples of great creativity when scientists have successfully pursued their theories beyond the knowledge of the time. The fascinating story of the protection strategy, known as vaccination today, goes all the way back to ancient Greece. Though there were no knowledge of antibodies in ancient Greece, physicians at the time began to understand that being infected with certain viruses could later prevent reinfection. For example, the Greek historian Thucydides recorded that people who survived the smallpox epidemics in Athens were protected from reinfection. One of the measures and fascinating steps on the path of curing disease was variolation. The Chinese were the first to discover and use a primitive form of vaccination termed variolation, also known as engrafting, which is the introduction of dried pus from a smallpox pustule into and make him immune to smallpox. It was carried out as early as the 10th century, and particularly between the 14th and 17th century. It was practiced in Africa, Turkey, and India as well, and after that, it spread to Europe and the Americas, thanks to Lady Montagu, who traveled to Constantinople and wrote letters back to England, where she explained the process of variolation and afterwards inoculated her son against smallpox in Turkey. So, the aim of the variolation process was to prevent smallpox by exposing healthy people to tissue from the scabs caused by the disease. They did this by either putting it under the skin or, more often, inserting powdered scabs from smallpox pustules up the nose. And after variolation started the concept of modern vaccination. Thanks to Edward Jenner, who was practicing medicine and surgery in England, was the first to officially experiment vaccination. In 1796, he took pus from a cowpox lesion on a milkmaid's hen, Sarah Nelmes, and inoculated an 8-year-old boy, James Phipps. 6 weeks later, Jenner variolated 2 sides of Phipps' arms with smallpox, yet the boy was unaffected by this as well as subsequent exposures. Based on the observations, Jenner published a classic text in the Annals of Medicine, his assertion that the cowpox protects the human constitution from the infection of smallpox, laid the foundation for modern vaccinology. Vaccine is derived from the Latin vacca, meaning cow, since the original smallpox immunization was derived from cowpox. The English surgeon Edward Jenner discovered vaccination and Pasteur invented vaccines. Indeed, almost 90 years after Jenner initiated immunization against smallpox, Pasteur developed another vaccine, the first vaccine against rabies. Louis Pasteur was a French chemist and microbiologist who developed the principle of attenuation and inactivation of vaccines. First of all, in 1879, Pasteur observed by chance that all cholera cultures lost their virulence. Accidentally, his assistant left the bacterial culture in open air, so after the vacation, Pasteur performed the experiment with same old cultures, and the chicken had only mild signs. Then, Pasteur injected with fresh bacteria, and they didn't become ill. So he did actually produce attenuated bacteria. 3 years later, in 1882, he developed inactivated vaccine against rabies. Through his experiments using rabbits and transmitting the infectious agent from animal to animal by intracerebral inoculations until he obtained a stable preparation. Thus, rather unknowingly, he produced a neutralized agent and opened the way for the development of a second class of vaccines, known as inactivated vaccines. So, thanks to the knowledge acquired during his studies, in 1881 he could develop the first vaccines against anthrax for animals, for sheep, goats, and rabbits. And 4 years later, in 1885, he developed the first human vaccine against rabies, being the first to be vaccinated a 9-year-old child bitten by a rabid dog. So after the first vaccine developed by Edward Jenner, it took almost 100 years to commercialize a smallpox vaccine and nearly 185 years to eradicate the smallpox, the only infectious disease that has been successfully uprooted. The vaccine most commonly used in 1960s and 70s were the first generation vaccines, which were derived from the lymph or skin of inoculated animals. Then the second generation vaccines used in the 70s were highly attenuated and produced in tissue or cells, and third generation vaccines were brought in use in the last phase of eradication from the 1975. Global Smallpox Eradication Program was initiated in 1966 and was carried out for the next 14 years, until 1980, and the last case of smallpox was seen in Somalia in 1977. So, on December 9, 1979, the humankind achieved smallpox eradication from the world, thanks to one of the greatest inventions in history, a true footprint of the joint effort and creativity used to solve the problems of humankind. Thank you so much for your attention.